Israeli missiles strike Gaza hospital, destroying emergency department and damaging structures. EU voices concern over worsening Gaza humanitarian crisis, urges Israel to lift blockade. And US President Donald Trump describes ongoing talks with Iran over nuclear program is going okay. Fourteen Palestinians have been killed and several others injured in a series of Israeli airstrikes across the Gaza Strip. In the town of Jabalia, 5 civilians were killed or others wounded when an airstrike hit a family home. In southern Gaza, 3 people, including a woman, were killed in a strike targeting a tent in an al-Mawasi area. 3 more were killed in a drone strike in El-Manara, while another 3 lost their lives in a separate strike on farmland in Al-Absain, east of Qnews. Two Israeli missiles have struck a building inside the main hospital in Gaza, destroying the emergency and reception department and damaging several other structures. The airstrikes demolished the hospital's emergency unit, main entrance and the facility housing medical oxygen for intensive care patients. The attack took place overnight as medical staff were urgently working to evacuate hundreds of patients from the hospital. The government media office in Gaza has condemned the bombing of a hospital in the Gaza city, describing it as a heinous crime against key medical facility. Al-Ahli Hospital, one of the oldest and most vital in the Strip, serves more than 1 million people and was heavily damaged in the strike. The media office stated that Israeli forces have destroyed 34 hospitals since the start of the conflict, calling the continued targeting of medical centers a violation of international law and the Geneva Conventions. Hamas has condemned the Israeli attack on Al-Ahli Hospital, calling it a new war crime and accusing the Israeli military of disregarding humanitarian laws and norms. The group also held the United States responsible, claiming Israel operates under U.S. diplomatic cover, with Washington obstructing international accountability efforts. The Palestinian death toll in the Gaza Strip has risen to 50,944, with 116,156 others injured from Israeli military operations since October the 7th of the year 2023. Israel resumed since military operations in Gaza on March the 18th, which led to the collapse of 2-month ceasefire. 563 Palestinians have been killed and 4,004 others injured. Meanwhile, a report released by the United Nations Relief and Works Agency for Palestinian Refugees in the Near East, UNRWA, shows that as of April this year, 289 of its team members have been killed over the course of the year-and-a-half-long conflict. The European Union has voiced deep concern over worsening humanitarian conditions in Gaza, urging Israel to lift the total blockade imposed since March the 2nd. EU condemned the killing of 15 paramedics in an Israeli strike on March the 23rd and called for accountability. The bloc also warned that food supplies brought in during the ceasefire are nearly depleted, stressing that international humanitarian law requires aid to reach civilians in need. The United Nations Relief and Workers Agency for Palestinian Refugees has warned that all essential supplies in Gaza are nearly depleted, raising fears that even infants are going to bed hungry. In a statement, Juliette Thomas, UNRWA's Director of Communications, called for immediate international action to prevent the worsening humanitarian crisis in the Gaza Strip. Thomas emphasized that 6 weeks into the Israeli-imposed blockade, which has halted both humanitarian aid and commercial supplies, food stocks are nearly exhausted. She reported that bakeries have shut down and hunger is spreading rapidly among the population. And for more analysis, we'll move on now to our colleague Rehem Morsi in the newsroom. Rehem.
Thank you so much, Rana. To help us analyse the current situation, we're joined from Cairo by the political science professor Ayman Al-Raqab. Welcome to Qnews, sir. Thank you for joining us. So, firstly, let's start off by asking, what are the broader implications of Al Ahli Hospital being rendered out of service for Gaza's collapsing healthcare system?
Greetings to you and to the viewers. Of course, targeting the Mamadani Hospital was one of the ongoing assaults committed by the Israeli occupations. The Ahli Hospital is one of the most oldest hospitals in Gaza, established under the British occupation in Palestine. It used to provide services to the Gazan population in particular, and it gained a lot of significance after the demolition of all the other 32 hospitals around Gaza. Now we have only 7 hospitals that were working. The Mamadani Hospital or Al Ahli Hospital was targeted this morning, which is a crime, a war crime, and efforts by the occupation to destroy all means of life in Gaza.
Well, sir, there have been repeated displacement orders now targeting central and southern Gaza, and this has been an ongoing situation for the last 17 months or so. How has this affected the humanitarian situation? And they're always telling people to move to certain, quote, safe zones, but are they actually safe for people and civilians living there?
There are no safe places for the civilians anymore, because all the places was targeted by the occupation. Today we have seen the bombing of Qnews and other places that were called safe with the population in it. We have seen the targeting of working vehicles containing families, complete families, children, women and men. This is an unprecedented case, similar to the World War II, which witnessed wide-range killing operations. The same scenario is being adopted by the IDF now, bombing every place in Gaza, and civilians are not safe anymore any place inside Gaza. Some of them prefer to die in their houses because all the places are being targeted the same.
Okay, so you talked about the idea of targeting medical facilities like Al Ahli Hospital constituting a violation of international law. Will there be any mechanism to hold those responsible accountable for these war crimes?
First of all, we are confident that these crimes are not subject to the statute of limitations, despite of the U.S. defense of the IDF and preventing any decisions to be issued against Israel. all the crimes committed by the IDF are in violation of the international law. We saw the ICC issuing 2 arrest warrants towards Netanyahu and the Minister of Defense. And despite of this, we find Netanyahu visiting Washington over and over, which is a challenge to the international law. Also, Hungary withdrawing from the ICC and hosting Viktor Orban, the Prime Minister of Hungary, to Benjamin Netanyahu. This is the law of jungle, not the international laws. These institutions established after World War II are no longer feasible and not able to protect the members affiliated with it or any human around the globe, as long as their interests are in contradiction with the powerful parties.
Okay, well, what about the latest attacks? How might the latest attacks and displacement orders impact the diplomatic efforts, especially when it comes to the ceasefire negotiations and the international calls for a general de-escalation? Is this still something that is possible given the Israeli actions in the Strip?
During the past few days, the Hebrew media have witnessed reports stating that when Netanyahu was summoned in Washington by President Trump, it wasn't only about the negotiations with Iran, it was also regarding the necessity of ending the war in Gaza. And here we're not talking about a complete halt of hostilities, but ending the operations by the end of next month. And this needs to happen before Trump's visit to the Gulf next month. Of course, they are racing time now, Netanyahu and the far-right government, and taking these random operations, killing and destroying different buildings on 70 kilometers area in the Gaza Strip and in Rafah city in particular. The Defense Minister Katz today talked about controlling the Rafah city and their intention to take control over the eastern part in Gaza. They are now confining the population in 50% only of the Gaza area, and which are all unsafe areas. All of these crimes are corrupting all the efforts exerted by the mediators. Cairo, for instance, is exerting all efforts possible to revive the peace process, starting with a truce. But all of these crimes and military operations are ruining the efforts. President Sisi is visiting Qatar today and will visit other Gulf countries to discuss a mechanism to reach a ceasefire or a truce. Cairo also is proposing a scheme to a plan or to reach an agreement. The US administration are still watching, and they are not exerting any real pressure on Netanyahu, unfortunately, which is the only viable card to obligate Israel to take actions.
Well, sir, you said that there may not be enough pressure exerted on Netanyahu and his government. This is specifically from the US, but in general, the international community is very interested in ending the violence within the Gaza Strip itself. Do you think that European partners, along with the Gulf states and the North African region, may possibly pressure the Netanyahu government into settling the situation?
It's not only about the Arab world leaders or international partners. They do not have the cards to pressure Netanyahu. Only the United States is able to pressure Netanyahu. That's why we have to see a real dialogue with the United States, where the United States realizes that their interests with the Arab world are no less compared to their interests with Israel. The new U.S. ambassador in Tel Aviv does not only belong to the Jewish state, he is also a Zionist and stated more than once that the U.S. is supporting Netanyahu based on high-level orders, expanding the settlements, and he even endorsed the attacks on the Aqsa Mosque, which is unlimited support by the United States to Netanyahu. Trump has adopted the same approach over and over, inciting against the Palestinian people. Only the United States, if it decides to change their strategy, they're on the only power possible able to pressure the Israeli occupation. Europeans are able, but they are not using their tools or pressuring cards till this moment. And consequently, the European power should be moving in this regard.
Okay, from Cairo, that was political science professor Ayman Al-Raqab. Thank you so much for joining us here on Q News. Thank you. And now we go back to you, Rana, in our studio.
Thank you so much, Riham. And we move on with the news bulletin, where Israeli forces have forcibly evicted several Palestinian families from their homes on the outskirts of the Nur al-Shams refugee camp east of Tulkarm. Residents were reportedly given a final deadline of 7 a.m. to evacuate, and heavy gunfire aimed at intimidating the local population. 1 day earlier, families in the nearby Jabal al-Nasr neighborhood faced similar eviction orders. In some cases, residents were forced to buy water tanks for Israeli soldiers as a condition to remain in their homes. Israeli authorities have prevented Palestinian Christian worshippers from the West Bank from entering occupied Jerusalem to attend Palm Sunday services. Access to the Holy City was heavily restricted under ongoing Israeli limitations on Palestinian freedom of movement. Strict military measures were enforced at checkpoints around Jerusalem and the Old City, further limiting entry for worshippers. U.S. President Donald Trump has described ongoing talks with Iran over its nuclear program as going okay. Speaking to reporters aboard Air Force One, Trump said the situation is progressing, but emphasized that nothing truly matters until an agreement is reached. He expressed cautious optimism, noting that the talks are going reasonably well. Iran and the United States have agreed to reconvene talks next week following what Tehran described as productive discussions in Oman. Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Arqachi called the meeting a positive and calm exchange, marking the first direct talks between Iran and the Trump administration, including during his first term. Arqachi confirmed that both sides agreed to continue the dialogue and reported a brief encounter between the Iranian delegation and U.S. officials led by Trump's Middle East envoy Steve Witkoff after the talks concluded. Iranian Foreign Ministry spokesperson has called state TV that it doesn't expect this round of talks to be long. He said that this is just the beginning, so it's natural that at this stage the parties are communicating their basic positions to the Omani mediator. Oman has long served as a mediator between Western powers and Iran, having brokered the release of several foreign and dual nationals held by the Republic. And now we move on to the latest developments in the Russian-Ukrainian conflict. The criminal has stated that relations with the United States are progressing well, but cautioned that the damage caused by the previous U.S. administration remains significant. Criminal spokesman Dmitry Peskov noted that while progress is being made, rebuilding ties from scratch is a challenging task that requires intense diplomatic efforts. U.S. President Donald Trump's special envoy Steve Witkoff held talks with President Vladimir Putin in St. Petersburg, focusing on the search for a peace deal on Ukraine, with Trump urging Russia to get moving. Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov has praised U.S. President Donald Trump for what he said was a better understanding of the Ukraine conflict than any other Western leader. Lavrov said at the Antalya Diplomacy Forum in southern Turkey that this is the only way to resolve the problem and establish long-lasting peace by addressing the root causes. His remarks followed talks in St. Petersburg between President Putin and Trump's special envoy Steve Witkoff about the search for a peace deal.
With conviction, several times stated.
U.S. President Donald Trump has said that talks aimed at ending the war in Ukraine may be going okay, but there's a point at which you just have to either put up or shut up. Trump made the comment to reporters the day after the showed frustration with Russia and told it to get moving on reaching a deal. Trump's special envoy Steve Witkoff had previously held talks with Russian President Vladimir Putin about the search for a peace deal. The talks came at a time when U.S.-Russia dialogue aimed at agreeing a ceasefire ahead of a possible peace deal to end the war appeared to have stalled over agreements around conditions for a full pause in hostilities. At least 21 people have been killed and 83 others were wounded by a Russian ballistic missile strike in the heart of the northern Ukrainian city of Sumy. Sumy's regional military administration released video showing the immediate aftermath of the strike. Bodies of the wounded and dead were seen lying on the streets as fires engulfed cars. Interior Minister Klimenko said the victims were on the street in vehicles, public transport and in buildings when the strike hit. Ukraine and Russia agreed to pause strikes on each other's energy facilities last month, but both sides have repeatedly accused each other of breaking the moratorium. Ukraine's ecology minister has said the confinement over Chernobyl's fourth nuclear reactor partially lost functionality and also needs to be restored. Ukraine said a Russian drone struck at the shelter of the destroyed power unit at the plant on February the 14th caused the fire and leaving a hole in the new safe confinement. Moscow denied involvement, with Russian Foreign Minister spokeswoman Maria Zakharov calling the drone attack on Chernobyl power plant a provocation. That brings us to the end of our news bulletin. Here's what we have been covering. Israeli missile strike Gaza hospital, destroying emergency department and damaging structures. EU voices concern over worsening Gaza humanitarian crisis, urges Israel to lift blockade. And U.S. President Donald Trump describes ongoing talks with Iran over nuclear program as going okay. This concludes our news bulletin for this hour. Don't forget to follow Qnews on YouTube, Facebook, X, Instagram and TikTok, Qnews EG to stay informed. Thank you very much for watching and stay tuned for more updates coming up here on Qnews.